Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy, and this is an extended edition. Extended Episode 8, XPages, One Man's Journey, boldly going where a developer hadn't gone before. Okay, what we're going to do today is I'm going to have another great guest contributor on, and I've invited onto the show Graham Akers, who's a longtime Notes developer and a consultant and business partner based somewhere in Canada, somewhere near a hockey rink, I'm sure. And his website is britech.ca, and he's on Twitter at gakers99, and his contact information is here, and it's also in his demo. And what he's going to come on and talk about is how he went from being a non-XPages developer to being an XPages developer, and he's got a lot of good demos on some of the techniques that he's used in some recent projects. He talks a little bit about how he got his start, what resources he used. So if this is if you're not yet really in the XPages development world, this might be I think it's kind of inspirational on how to progress from not using XPages to using XPages. So a couple things I just wanted to highlight before we get into his stuff is it is important to build up a list of resources. There's a lot of great XPages resources out today. We've got the XPages forum, which is available. We've got the designer wiki, bloggers on Planet Lotus. There's several XPages posts per day, it seems. I still will go to W3 schools for the non-traditional notes stuff, like the CSS and JavaScript and things like that. There's a new one I've been using a little bit, java2s.com, I think it is. I should have put it in here, but I didn't. And that's kind of been a little helpful in trying to use some of the Java objects, because I'm not a Java guy, but some of the but you can use Java objects in server-side JavaScript, and some of the events actually return Java objects. So you can't be afraid of at least touching Java to some extent. And I did want to just show here, because I haven't done this on the Notes 9 stuff yet, this roadmap, which Chris Tui came up with for a recent webinar that I participated on for this XPages Guru thing. And this is really one of the best graphics. It's just a table, but it's one of the best graphics that I've seen on progressing to become an XPage developer. And if we just go through it quickly, I know you can read, but stage one, you got to start small with XPages. If you try to bite off too big a project, and Graham, I think he mentions this in his demo, you're going to hurt yourself, quite honestly. So I've got a Notes 9 show coming up very soon where I'm going to take a client-based application, and I'm just going to add a link that opens a browser to print something. So I'm going to take printing out of the Notes client and just use XPages to fulfill that need. So as Chris has on here, just start off small with basic HTML, CSS. Just get your feet wet. And then the stage two is evolving your existing applications. Maybe getting into the source panel, maybe getting to some business logic inside, some server-side JavaScript libraries, etc. And then stage three, as he calls it, is starting an application from scratch. Some more advanced kind of HTML and CSS stuff, maybe touching Java. And stage four, which I am not in stage four myself, and I don't see myself getting to stage four anytime too soon. But that's really kind of integrating a lot of more advanced topics like MVC, which Chris is big on, but really Java, like the managed beans would be in stage four, which you've probably heard of, and just more of a polished, advanced kind of system. So I figure I'm at least at stage three by now, with stage four kind of far off on the horizon. But that's it. So again, the key is, if you want to get next pages, start small. And just do a little piece here, or add on a little piece to an existing client application, or maybe even a Domino web application. You don't have to rewrite the world to get into XPages. So just bite off what you can chew. Okay, so saying that, I want to get right into Graham's demo, which he talks in the beginning for a little bit about how he got started, and then he goes into some kind of very interesting demos, which is probably worthwhile. And here he is, and I do want to thank him for coming on the show. I do really appreciate it.
Hi there, this is Gray Makers, Brightech Systems, and this is my presentation on how I got started in XPages development. I want to start by thanking David Leedy for giving me this opportunity to record this video for NotesIn9. This is a presentation that I did for the Cross Country Lotus user group in May of this year. So the agenda, I want to start off by talking about my goals for putting this presentation together, kind of the reasons for sharing this information with you, and then give a brief description of my background in the Lotus Notes world, just to do a level set so that you understand where I'm coming from. Talk about how I got started with XPages, the opportunities that I had, the project, a couple of projects that I've done, and the resources that I've used, and some of the key thoughts that I've come across, some things that I ran into as I was learning XPages. Show off some of the things that I think are really cool about XPages, and then just quickly talk about what I plan to do next in my path to learning XPages, and leave you with a bunch of the resources that I used to learn XPages. So let's get started. The reason for putting this presentation together, really the point is to focus on my experience and primarily share the pitfalls that I ran into, hopefully so that people out there don't run into the same things. And a couple of key thoughts, really. I'm not going to explain what XPages are. I'm assuming that you know what XPages are, but really haven't had the chance to do a project yet. This is definitely not a how to get started with XPages presentation. It's really everything to do with my experience. So my background, I've been in the Lotus Notes world for 19 years, development and administration. Currently I'm an IBM business partner focusing on application development, so I've kind of strayed away from the admin side of the world. Very much a deep Lotus Notes forms, views, traditional, all of the development elements that you would have used over the last years for building Notes applications. Very much a strong Lotus script background as well. And in terms of web tools, I've certainly built websites with Lotus Notes, so I have some JavaScript and HTML experience, slightly less experience in the world of XML. And when it comes right down to it, I started off with having no experience or background in CSS and Java. So how did it get started? Well, I had a couple of colleagues that went to Lotus Fair 2009. I wasn't there, but they came back and were just talking about all of the buzz that there was around XPages, and so started seeing articles and information pop up here and there as the year progressed. I did have the chance to attend Lotus Fair in 2010 and attended several sessions on XPages, including the one that started off, I believe it was on the Sunday that Matt White did, that was just captivating, and really came away from that with plans to start learning XPages right away. But of course, as we all know, getting back from Lotus Fair, you get back to your real life and lots of other projects and things on the go. So it took a while before I got going, but started doing the self-education thing and the various online information that was available, and started actually by doing Declan's step-by-step tutorial, building the phone directory. Of course, his blog and the links to that information have changed, but I've managed to track it down, so for anyone that wants to go and have a look at that, they can start with the link that I've got on the screen there. Note, of course, that it's dated information. It was very much in the 8.5 world, but certainly there are still some gems in there. Unfortunately, the demo database isn't available anymore, and again, it's dated material, but certainly was a good place for me to start. And then I finally reached the point where I had an opportunity to work on a project in about September of 2010, and really jumped in with both feet on finding all of the different resources that were available to get myself up to speed to be able to take on the project. So certainly using David's site was a great help. I also subscribed to Matt White's site and started going through his video tutorials, which I believe at last check the other day was up to 50 or in fact maybe 54 videos, 10 hours worth of material, and it's been just an absolute treasure trove of information for people that are wanting to get up to speed on Lotus Notes. Sorry, on XPages, and of course OpenNTF and all the different Googling that you can do. And of course, in my case, when it comes to a lot of the web side of the conversation for XPages, the W3 Schools site for teaching HTML, XML, and in particular CSS was something that helped me as I got onto this project. One of the biggest problems that I had with the project was really my lack of experience with CSS and layout and design, look and feel, and so on. The project that I had was a rebuild of an existing Notes application in an intranet that was basically publishing news, and I really can't share more than that because I didn't get permission from my client to do so. But it had very much an intranet feel to it, so I wanted to make sure that it had a consistent look and feel, and smooth navigation and whatnot, and just being able to get over the hump of CSS was my biggest challenge. The initial education that I did with all of the different tools that were available, talked a lot about OneUI, talked a lot about themes. I know David talks about the Blueprint framework, which I attempted to use and implemented badly. But I managed to struggle through it. And with one of my other projects, I certainly struggled with radio buttons and just being comfortable with the different controls and how to interact with them. So very much I talk amongst my colleagues and my clients about pointing the fire hose at your head, and this was very much that experience of just trying to drink as fast as possible from the fire hose. Really, I think probably this first application that I worked on was too complex an app to start with, but again, Matt White's videos were very helpful. Just a quick note, though, that there were two different source databases providing information that I was putting together for this XPage app, with 3 separate areas of content on one XPage, and again, probably something that was more complex than would have been advised to do in my very first project. But what I learned from it was certainly having multiple data sources on one XPage is very cool, and something that for those of us that are years and years and years of Lotus Notes experience is a quantum leap forward, and very welcome. And custom controls, I really fell in love with custom controls and the concept of cascading them and building separate pieces of content in very small controlled bits, and then putting them together like a puzzle was very much a welcome concept, and something that I've continued to use since. Some of the other things that I used for my education, I did do the XPages boot camp in November in Las Vegas last year with Russ and Paul, and it was just an absolute wonderful experience. 3 days of again drinking from the fire hose. It's certainly not within everybody's budget, but I really found it a worthwhile investment, both of time and money. And great opportunity to get wonderful feedback from Russ and Paul. The other thing that really helped me in terms of CSS were the articles that Scott Good's written, both for the View and his presentations at Lotus Fair. I was at Lotus Fair 2011 and sat in on a couple of his presentations on CSS and JSON, and Scott does a great job of very simple presentation, or helping to make perhaps things that are new concepts clear and easy to understand. So I would certainly recommend anything that he's put together, especially in terms of CSS. Like I say, my lack of experience with CSS was a hindrance to me, and that Scott really helped. The XPages wikis are certainly great sources of information. I've found them to be a challenge to navigate through, and actually had the chance to talk to somebody at Lotus Fair 2011 about just the challenges with navigation within the wikis, and the folks at IBM have talked about making that a better experience. So I would suggest, if you have had trouble with the wikis, not to give up on them, because they are full of information that's really valuable. It's just sometimes a challenge to try and find it. And of course, there's the XPages forum, and also in Twitter. I'm a big Twitter user now, and have found that it's a great place for sharing information too. So using the hash XPages search term will turn up good information for you. Some of the other things that I worked on, my next opportunity was a survey, which I'll actually show later in this presentation. But anybody that's worked with Notes for any amount of time probably has had the chance to build a survey inside of Lotus Notes. So turning it into an XPage app was something for me anyways that was a great learning experience. Building the basic building blocks for the survey, very straightforward application. But that was kind of my initial approach, was to keep it simple. I took my time with the CSS, again using Scott Good's articles, and came up with something that I was quite happy with. Ultimately, it turned into quite a large copy and paste exercise because, of course, from one question to the next, it basically held the same look and feel, layout, and navigation. I did use Dojo for the first time, and took some of David's content from a presentation he did at Lotus 2011 around Dojo, and used the little star rating widget that's available through Dojo, so that was quite fun. And again, like I say, it was a good learning experience with a simple application. Twitter helped me out. I was trying to record IP addresses through a piece of code that I found from the wiki, the XPages wiki, that ultimately ended up being a bug, and Thomas Adrian helped me out there, confirming that it was. And of course, I'm recording this video only days after watching one that David put together at Packlug in Las Vegas, where he talks about a different way of collecting the IP address. So sorry I didn't get to that before now, but anyway, that was an interesting little experience. So, moving on, some of the key thoughts about XPages in my experience in learning it, and where I'm going. Certainly, I recommend to everybody that you should be using 8.5.2, and the recording of this video, 8.5.3 has reached the point where IBM and others are publicly talking about it. So we're very much looking forward to what's going to be available there. But for folks that are using 8.5 or 8.5.1, if you want to start working with XPages, each move from 8.5 to 8.5.1 and from 8.5.1 to 8.5.2 has been a quantum leap forward in terms of the kinds of things that you can do with XPages inside of Notes, and I expect the same from 8.5.3. But if you're at 8.5 or 8.5.1, I would recommend getting to 8.5.2 as quickly as you can. The other key thought, and this came out of the XPages boot camp, and it's something that I certainly experienced, is that you just can't expect to be an XPages guru in a day or a week or even a month. It's very much a lot of stuff there, and is worthwhile plugging away and plugging away and plugging away. For me, it was really a challenging experience to get going, because I just wasn't patient enough with myself. But ultimately have really fallen in love with XPages, and so I encourage everybody to take their time, keep working at it, because you're going to enjoy it. And the other piece of information, which I think is probably pretty clear from what I've already said, start with something small and simple. Ultimately, I started with something that in hindsight ended up being more challenging or larger in terms of a project than I should have started with. And this is fairly common information that people in the XPages world are saying to folks coming into the XPages world, and that is that you need to learn XML, XHTML, CSS, JavaScript, and Java in that order. I personally, having no CSS experience at all, would probably put that up front. For me anyway, the XML came quite easily. And I have a bit of HTML already, so that wasn't overly challenging for me, but certainly CSS was where I was challenged. And I think the other thing to say, in terms of all of the different resources that I use to educate myself on XPages, there were so many little things, so many details, and other information that was shared that I was trying to pay attention to. That I found myself, again, not necessarily being terribly patient with myself, and wanting to keep all that stuff in mind. That ended up being clutter, and it added to the confusion. In the case of CSS, I would actually go counter to what David had said earlier about using Blueprint. Personally, coming at it from having no CSS experience at all, I would say don't worry about OneUI or themes or any framework whatsoever. Just get comfortable with the basic building blocks of CSS, and then move yourself up to different frameworks and so on. Keep it simple. I can't stress that enough. That there's just so much to know, and there's so many things that sometimes that can get in the way of having a good positive learning experience. All right, let's move on to looking at some demos. The first one is the survey application that I built, and I want to just show some of the neat things that there are available in XPages. Again, to people who haven't done an application, these are just new quick hits. Lots of other people have talked about them, but these are some of the things that I find quite powerful. So what I want to show here is an example of the source view and how you can work in XML in the code rather than looking at the WYSIWYG. Well, in fact, it isn't WYSIWYG, but it's the drag and drop design area of XPages. And a couple of neat things, being able to compare the previous version of a set of code that you've been working on, talk about scoped variables and how they work, and also show you some of the CSS that I've put together. Alright, so the survey application was for a minor hockey association that my daughter played in last year, and I'm a coach and was on the executive. So this was the end of season survey that we wanted to put together. Fairly simple application. You needed to select the team that you played for, that your daughter played for, and then if you're a parent, you're filling out the parent survey, players filled out the player survey, and of course there was a goaltender survey as well. So I was involved with the Bantam 1 team, select the team, and hit the survey button, and up comes the survey, and you'll notice that it keeps track of which team was selected. This is an example of the scoped variables that I'm going to show you in the design. Here's an example of the Dojo star rating widget that I mentioned I used, and this was used quite extensively. Also wanted to show out quickly, we wanted to get a rating on the coaches, which is a pretty interesting thing to do when you're one of the coaches and you've actually coded the software up. Kind of neat to see the results, a bit daunting, but nonetheless. So I do a lookup to see the coaches that are set up for each of the teams, and in this case our team had 4 coaches. I'll show you an example of another team that had 3 coaches, and the code is set up to either show or hide depending on the number of coaches that were on the team. And then a couple of other questions. Here's the radio buttons that I was talking about, were quite challenging to get working. And then these two, questions 5 and 6, you'll notice when we look at a different team, these were only set up to display for specific teams, so I'm actually able to show or hide a question depending on which team you selected that you played for. So just to show an example of that, I'll go back and select the Midget 3 team and click the survey, and you can see that the coach names are different, and in fact this team only had 3 coaches, so that 4th box, and it's actually set up for 5, doesn't show up. And then questions 5 or 6 says that they were for rep teams only. So let's take a look at what this really looks like in the code. Standard Notes app, we've got some forms and some views, and then some XPages, and I actually did this without custom controls, which isn't necessarily a best practice, but I did put this together reasonably quickly, and so I decided to make extensive use of copy and paste rather than what I would consider proper design practices. But anyway, let's take a look at the XPage that has the player survey in it. So here's the look and feel portion of things, and behind that is the source view, and this was something that I wanted to illustrate how in the time that I've been working with XPages, I've become really comfortable with working in the source view, and this is something that the material that David and Matt have posted up in their video series, that you eventually find that you're more comfortable working in source view, and I really found that to be the case building this application, really got into copy and paste. It's neat when you get into source view and you select a particular design element, and it highlights the open and close tags of that design element. So you can see that this particular table was actually quite huge. Let's go back and pick something that's a little bit smaller and easier to see. This is just a row, and it illustrates that that's the row. And if I actually want to click back over, you can see that it gets highlighted in the design view. So it's really quite intuitive, flipping back and forth between design view and source view to be able to see particular elements that you've selected. And in fact, you can come in and select an item in a design view and flip over to source view, and it has that section of code highlighted for you, which is quite valuable. One of the other things that I wanted to show here was compare to previous version. And this is not necessarily something that you need to have the actual XPage open for, but you can say, so what I did, sorry, I just right-clicked on the XPage that I wanted to compare, and I choose Compare With, and Local History pops up, and it gives us the ability to see the last few times that the page was saved. So if I choose the previous version of this page, it actually highlights the difference in the code between the two pages, and you can quickly go down and scan. In this particular case, for this example, I just did one quick one, but if you've got multiple extensive changes in pages, you'll get a fairly lengthy list down the column here, and you can actually track back and forth between. So going back to the old days of Notes, you make a change and save it, and if you're doing things fast and furious, you're not necessarily paying attention to all the things that get changed. This is an absolute lifesaver and quite a valuable little feature. Okay, I also wanted to show that scoped variable thing, so let me go back in here and show you up here where it says team. Let me jump over to the home XPage and show you here. When you select the team, and this is just a standard drop list, it's actually bound to the team field in the notes document. So if I go back up to the form and the start and the team, we've got a dialog list with all the different teams, and you'll notice that some of them I'm actually using aliases on, and also notice this is a very, very, very plain looking notes form, but it's tied to the XPage, and what we do here is when you click the button to launch the player survey, I create a scoped variable and I put the value from the team field into the scoped variable, so that stays in memory, and when I come along in the player survey, I go to this computed field, which then comes along and gets from the scope variable the value that I put into team, and then this field actually grabs that value and puts it up on the screen, computed value. So that's how you can pass data back and forth between pages when you're working in an XPage application. Okay, and then the other thing that I wanted to show here quickly is just the CSS that I put together, and let's jump down to resources here in style sheets. So that rating button, that little star widget, Dojo widget that I was able to use, has its own CSS. So you'll find that as you start to use Dojo elements that you need to include, whether it's CSS or JavaScript or what have you, additional files into your application. And then this is the actual CSS that I put together. So it, without spending a whole lot of time talking about the different bits and pieces, it was something that I've used to become comfortable with building web applications, and it didn't take long. And actually, a lot of this stuff is based on the material that Scott Good put together. But you can see, for example, here's our panel with question 1, and then our panel with question 2 in it. And the two panels themselves are very simply styled with some CSS. So if I go down into the properties here, my style, I've got survey inner panel A, and then I come along to this guy, and we've got survey inner panel B. Well, the CSS for those is really quite straightforward, and really all I'm doing there is I'm changing the background color. Let's get to it here. So inner panel A, just an RGB value with a slightly different color of gray in the background, but then the width and the padding is exactly the same between the two. So all I had to do was switch back and forth and end up coming up with a page that gives you a nice shaded background that just illustrates the break or the difference between one question to the next. So next up, I'd like to show a quick demo of the Brytech website that I built using XPages. And really, the main example that I want to show here is the use of custom controls and nested custom controls. Alright, so the Brytech website. This is certainly nothing fancy. It, in fact, is very simple and straightforward, but it's a good illustration of how custom controls can fit together. Just to illustrate a few things, we've got a header, we've got a menu, we've got the body of each of the different pages. That same menu is repeated again as essentially a footer, and then we've got our copyright bar. So how does this all fit together? Well, here's my list of custom controls and my list of XPages. Again, I wouldn't suggest that this is overly best practice, but at least it illustrates kind of the point that I want to put together. So there's the basic building blocks, and then there's kind of my content pages. So I've got my header, which doesn't look terribly exciting at all, and when we get into source view, you can see that it's really quite simple. We have, in fact, the menu. I had planned on having a custom control for the menu and decided against it once I built the footer, which has the links. And as you see, they're the exact same links. So in fact, I used what I'm calling footer, which is really menu, twice, and I'll show you how that works. And then the copyright piece shows up at the bottom. So I've compiled those all into what I call my wrapper custom control. And to make this a little easier to read, let's go into source view. I've got a panel within a panel, and in that case I'm using my CSS to make everything look nice and pretty. Then I've got my header, what I'm calling the footer, which again has the menu in it, and you'll notice I used that twice, and then the copyright bar. And something here that we haven't talked about, but others have, and that is a facet or an editable area, which I have essentially as a placeholder to put other content into. And that is my custom control. So it combines a variety of custom controls, and then what we do is we go over to the XPage side of things, and in our home XPage, what we do is, this is the editable area here that I've dropped into the specific content, which happens to be another custom control. But if we go into source view, it's really quite simple. We've got our layout wrapper custom control with what I'm calling the body home, which is a specific content custom control wrapped into it. So flipping back and forth from source view on the different custom controls, you can see how you can really break it down and make it quite simple and focus in if you're debugging or what have you. Be able to step into specific pieces where you have nice, concise, small bits of code that are all then wrapped together into larger bits of code, or sorry, larger pieces of content, but again still quite simplified. So it's a neat approach in terms of taking all of your content, all of your design, modularizing it, and then compiling it together. So next I'd like to show something very cool, and that's an example of having a view and a form, or view and form data displayed on the same XPage. This comes from a demo database that was given to us, those of us that attended the XPages boot camp. And it also has an example, or at least I'd like to use it to show an example of how the outline view works in Domino Designer, which is another useful tool for developers to navigate their way around the contents of an XPage. This example was built by Paul Calhoun of Group Business Software, and it was again given to us at the XPages boot camp. And it's an example of a simple contact database. This is what it looks like in the Notes client. So this is the next page running in the Notes client, and really a pretty simple example, but what we've got is a view that has some contact information in it, and one of the columns is lit up to allow you to select the person, and when you select the person, there's a partial refresh happens that actually takes the document data and presents it on the screen. And then some simple buttons you can click to edit the information. You can cancel and it closes it off. So let's take a look at what that looks like in Designer. What we've got here is a pretty simple screen. It has a table, and the table, if we look at it here, this was the outline view that I wanted to illustrate. So what you have is the ability to drill into the different design elements in your XPage and actually select them. As you can see, the screen updates here, and if you go into source view, what you've selected is actually highlighted in source view, which is really kind of cool. And then we've got a panel inside of this table cell, and this is important to understand. The panel has the name of person data, and what happens is when you select an item in the column that's lit up in the view, there's a partial refresh that happens right here. So there's some code that basically takes the document ID from the record that you've selected, puts it into a session scope variable, and then does something called partial refresh, and it identifies the person data design element, whatever that happens to be, to actually update it, and that's what creates your update for you. One other thing that's worth noting here, we can also select it in the outline view of the data, but there are two document sources or two data sources in this XPage. One is the view and the other is the document or the person form. The next quick example that I'd like to show comes from Declan's original tutorial on building the contact database, and basically taking just a couple of small examples from that XPage or from that application. The first is really showing the blue diamonds and how you can compute different values. So in this particular case, what we're going to show is how to use the blue diamonds to write a little piece of code that decides whether or not to show something, which is the visible property that we're talking about here. And in this case, I'm going to show an example of using a property of the database object that is to check and see whether the database is full text indexed or not. I also want to show, as much as I talk about not heading down the path of themes in OneUI, once you get to that point, or when you're ready to start playing around with them, there's just a quick example of how easy it is to turn them on and off. So let's jump in. Alright, here we have the example, Declan's phone book example from his tutorial. And just to point out a couple of things, it's running in a browser. It's using the OneUI theme, which of course you can use OneUI v2 now, but this was written in the 5 days, so it uses OneUI. And also like to point out the fact that we have a search box in our place bar, and we're going to control whether this search box shows up. We're going to make it computed so that it checks to see whether the database is full text indexed or not. And if it isn't full text indexed, then it's not going to show up. So let's have a look at that. First of all, just to show you the database properties, this database is not full text indexed. So when we put the computed property on that panel, and this is how it works in Outline, Custom, we have our panel for our search box, and it has a visible property, which of course right now is enabled. But as anybody that's done just a little bit of reading on or watched any of the other videos that are out there about XPages development, we've got these blue diamonds that allow you to compute the value, and in this particular case we're going to compute whether it's visible or not. Very simple. The database object is already instantiated for you, so anybody that's coming from LotusScript to JavaScript and isn't familiar with the JavaScript, especially the new JavaScript that's in XPages, you don't have to set up your variables, or at least you don't have to set up some of your variables, and one of which is the database object, thankfully. And of course there's a property is full text indexed, which returns true or false. So if there is no full text index, it's going to return false, which is going to tell the visible property to not show it. So let's save our change, close that, go back over here, refresh the screen, and our search box goes away. Alright, one other thing that I'd like to show, and that is how easy it is to switch between themes. So in the application properties of your application, you can go to the XPages tab, and right up at the top there's the application theme. So you need to do a bunch of setup. I'm not going to get into the details of how to do that, but once it is set up, it's quite easy to change. All applications start with the server default, which is essentially very simple basic theming, nothing fancy by any stretch of the imagination. And so we've turned that theme off. If we just do a refresh, you can see that there's a whole lot of stuff that's missing, and it just is a very plain presentation. But we can go back, change to OneUI, hit save, and come back to our browser and refresh, and we've got our theme back. So that's how easy it is to switch between themes. So the next demo I'd like to do illustrates how you can use repeat controls. Repeat controls are, well, they're pretty amazing actually. They're simple and complex at the same time. Basically, they give you the ability to iterate a data set, and maybe the simplest way to think of a repeat control is that it very much looks like a view. You put something into it and it repeats it on the screen. But you're not limited to just a view, and in fact you can make a repeat control present the contents of a view, but you can also make a repeat control present the contents of the results of a formula. You can build arrays. You can put other repeat controls inside of repeat controls. And to be perfectly honest, I'm very much at the beginning of my understanding and use of repeat controls, so there are other people in the community who are much better versed to explain how they work, but I want to just show a quick touch of how they work. And as it turns out, when I was preparing for this demonstration, I was also working on a project to build a phone directory, and happened to come across an article written by Scott Good in The View that did one of the things that I wanted to build for this phone directory, which was an alphabet pager. So let me show you how that works. So to begin this demo, I want to show the sample database that comes with the article that Scott wrote in The View. And just a quick note, the article that has this demo database is the first of a two-part series on repeat controls, and I have yet to have a chance to read the second one, but the first one shows exactly what I want to demonstrate. And again, get your appetite whet for working with repeat controls, which are quite fun. So the demo itself is a contact database and purely designed to illustrate the repeat controls. So what we have are two repeat controls and a pager on the screen. The first repeat control is across the top here, and it's designed to be an alphabet pager, and the second repeat control shows the contents of the view. And it's important to make the distinction: this isn't a view, this is a repeat showing data that's collected from a view, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get into the design. Just a note about the pager across the top though. There are a whole bunch of pagers that come with XPages out of the box design, but an alphabet pager isn't one of them. So this is actually quite neat that it came available when it did, especially for me because I was working on an application that needed one. But it's really simple. You click one of the letters in the repeat, and I'll show you how it works, but that letter gets stored in memory, and then there's a filter on the contents that are pulled back from the view to only show entries in the database that have, in this case, that letter as the first letter of their surname. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Alright, so to start with, the data source for this view the data source for this XPage is the people view, but it has a filter on it, and going back to our blue computed diamonds, the filter is something called selected letter, which is put into a view scope variable, and I'll show you where that comes from. So important to just understand that each time this whole XPage is refreshed, it's going to filter the contents of the people view by the letter that's stored in memory. Okay, so the next thing we have here is a panel, and this is important to understand. The panel's name is content, which the code uses to refresh, so keep that in mind. But the whole panel contains both repeat controls and the pager. So the name picker repeat control, Scott wrote this to very simply using a piece of JavaScript, hard code in an array that is each of the letters from the alphabet, and they are referenced when we're coding by a variable or a reference name of a letter. And when we get into the contents of this repeat, it contains a link. The label for that link is a computed value, and lo and behold, it happens to be letters. So each of the elements of the array are presented as a link. So that means that all of the letters in the alphabet are put into the array, and you can click on them. When you click on them, we do a view scope entry that gets the value of the letter that was selected, and the view scope variable is called selected letter. Okay. So this is the repeat that shows the values from the people view. The data source of this is the people view. And in this case, it's called view row. That is, that we'll refer to it programmatically in the computed field here. The value is view row.getColumn value, and then we're getting one of the columns out of the view. And it's really that simple. There's a line break in there in order to make it look good. But that's how it works. You click B, it puts B into memory, refilters the entire contents of the view, or sorry, the whole panel by that B, and pulls back all of the values in the database that start with the letter B. And of course this pager just lets you run through all of those names. Very simple, very cool. Highly recommend starting to learn repeat controls. Alright, so the last demo that I want to show is how to build a multilingual application in XPages. And for those of us that have to build multilingual applications, this is really pretty exciting compared to how we had to do it previously in Lotus Notes. So the idea is that there's a section on the application properties page for your application that lets you specify more than one language that your application will support. You need to specify the default language that you support, and once you get to the end of your development cycle, once all of the language in your application is set up, you go through a process that ultimately generates properties files for each of the languages that your application supports. Those need to be manually translated and imported back in, which is bringing them back into the application is a very simple step. Basically, it's a copy and paste exercise. And then your application supports more than one language. A couple of things that are important. There's some steps that you have to go through, so I don't want to make it sound like it's overly simple, but it actually is a whole lot easier than the way that we had to do it in the past. Anyway, one of the things that's really important to keep track of is the fact that all of the language that you put into your application has to be in some form of a control, whether that's a label or a link or a computed field or what have you. Obviously, XPages supports the notion of typing labels and what have you right into the page, but if they aren't in a control, then they don't get picked up by this process, and they ultimately don't get put into the properties file to be translated. So that's a very important step to keep in mind. And all of this is in wonderful detail in Chapter 15 of the Mastering XPages book. So if you have the book, Chapter 15 is a place you want to go. If you don't have the book, well, go out and get the book. Let's have a look. The sample database that I have here comes from the samples that were included with the Mastering XPages book. This particular one shows the translated results of the demo application that they show in the book. So to start off with, let's take a look at the application properties page and select the XPages tab. And this section of the page right here shows us the localization information. So we see that the source language of this application is English, but that the application also supports German, Chinese, and Arabic. And if we choose to, we've got a big long list of all of the different languages that today's browsers support, and we can just select any of these, and all that'll happen is that it'll generate a properties file for that language that then obviously needs to be translated into that language, saved back into the application, and it will support that language. So what we have, just the one sample that I want to show you here, is a locale switching page that was built for demonstrating it. And as we can see, very simple. We've got just a label that says this page is in English. If we go into the source here, the thing that I pointed out earlier is that we have to put all of the language into a control. So this particular control is called label 1, which maps into the properties files that are generated. And of course, for example, we've got link. So this particular link 4 says German. And over here are all of the properties files that are generated. So if we have a look at the properties file in English, Label 1 says this is the English version of the page. Link 4 says German. If we go to the German properties file, we get those text strings translated into that particular language. And just to show you how funky things can get, this is what it looks like in Arabic. So we're looking at all kinds of different escape characters that support that particular language. And then when we look at it in the browser, or in the Notes client for that matter, this is what we get. So the link is going to run a little piece of code that switches the default language of the browser to German, and instantaneously it's now switching to that properties file. The XPage, it's the same exact XPage. In fact, if you look at the URL, you're not going to see it change when you switch through, but the particular characters that are displayed on the screen do change. And there we go. That's really quite cool. Again, for those of us that need to build multi-language applications, this looks like it's going to be so much easier to do than how we had to do it in the past. In wrapping up, I'd like to just touch on where I'm going to next in my XPages development, my education. I've got a customer who I'm talking to about taking what is a very mature Lotus Notes-based intranet, browser-based intranet with more than 50 Notes database applications in it, and taking a new HTML design that's been put together for navigating through this intranet in Notes and porting it over to XPages, and then slowly moving those databases over to XPages as well. And another opportunity that I've got is to take external data out of Oracle and be able to present it through using XPages. So those are some quite fun projects that I'm looking forward to working on. Also, I'm just playing around with the extension library and looking to expand my understanding of how that works. Looking forward to seeing what's coming from the extension library and going to be out of the box in 8.5.3 when it's available. And also quite neat to see the different custom controls that have been submitted to the OpenNTF contest that's been going on lately. Further to that, expanding my understanding and use of Dojo and jQuery, and just the neat features that are available from those extension or those JavaScript libraries that are available. And really, when it comes down to it, I'm becoming a bit of an XPages snob. In fact, there's the XPages is just so powerful that I'm really recommending to my customers when they want to look at building new applications that they should be done in XPages, and even to the point of looking at enhancements that are scheduled for existing applications, trying to find a way that they can be perhaps considered more of a new development project and invest that time in taking that application up to XPages and then building whatever enhancements are being looked for. Okay, what are some of the resources that I've used and that are available? Rather than list them all, I'll just let you read them there, but everything on this page has value to offer, and certainly recommend considering all of them. There's lots of free, wonderful resources on the internet, and then there's the different courses and books that you can buy, subscriptions, and so on, all of value, and I'm trying to drink up as much of them as I can. And just to leave you, here's my contact information. I'm based in Western Canada. There's my email address and phone number. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. And when I'm running off my Britex server, I am available through same time in the Greenhouse Users Group and the Yellow Leaders Group. Thank you very much, and I hope this was of value, and love to get your feedback. So if you would like to pass along a comment, please send me a note. If you see me at a Lotus User Group event or at Lotusphere or something else, please do come up and say hello. And once again, thanks very much to David Leedy and NotesIn9 for allowing me to make this presentation.
And that's Graham's demo. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to contact him about any questions you might have. A couple further resources that I'm just going to throw out here right now is just the XPages blog and the XPages wiki. Look for some of these bloggers at planetlotus.org. TLCC has great information, as does Matt White on XPages 101. XPages 101 is kind of like NotesIn9, but better. and some longer shows. And I think Notes9 has 7.5 hours of content right now, and XPages 101 has 10 hours of content. So with my stuff and Matt's stuff, you might have 17 hours there. So there's good stuff there. Hopefully, it's definitely Matt's stuff. Hopefully, my stuff. And the XPages boot camp is still running, as far as I know. I don't know what cities they're at, but there's good information there. If you have any questions for me, here's my information, and I thank you for your time.